adapted from 1001 Nights. Sindbad's third voyage, the Cannibals and the Clever Escape. Baghdad, with its bustling markets and golden domes, had once again become a place of comfort and stability for Sindbad. After his previous voyages, he had returned to the city, not only with riches beyond measure, but also with tales that had earned him the admiration of all who knew him. His home, situated in a quiet corner of the city, was filled with treasures from distant lands, gems that sparkled like stars, silks as soft as the morning breeze, and rare artifacts that spoke of adventures far from the familiar streets of Baghdad. Yet, for all the wealth and admiration that surrounded him, Sindbad found himself restless. The city, which had once felt so full of life and excitement, now seemed smaller, quieter. The everyday routines of the marketplace, the warm greetings from neighbors, and even the comfort of his grand home did little to ease the stirring within him. It was not wealth that Sindbad longed for, nor was it the recognition of his peers. What he desired, deep within his heart, was the thrill of the unknown, the sense of wonder that came with stepping into a world uncharted and unexplored. As he sat by the window of his home, watching the sun dip below the horizon and cast the streets in a golden glow, Sindbad's thoughts turned inward. He had all a man could want: wealth, comfort, and the respect of those around him. Yet, he could not ignore the pull that tugged at his soul, the call of the sea that had always whispered promises of adventure, danger, and discovery. Why, he wondered, did he feel this need for more? Was it not enough to live in peace, to enjoy the fruits of his labor, and to spend his days in the quiet beauty of Baghdad? These were the questions that plagued Sindbad's mind, and though he sought answers, he knew that the only way to find them was to once again venture beyond the city's walls. His desire for adventure was not driven by greed, nor was it a thirst for fame. It was something deeper, something tied to his very being, a need to explore the vastness of the world, to understand its mysteries, and perhaps most importantly, to understand himself. The sea had always been both a friend and a foe to Sindbad. It had brought him riches and nearly taken his life on more than one occasion. It was unpredictable, dangerous, and vast. Yet, it was also the one place where he felt truly alive. As he watched the stars begin to dot the night sky, Sindbad made his decision. He would set sail once more, not for wealth, but for the journey itself. He would seek not gold or jewels, but the wisdom that came from facing the unknown. The days leading up to his departure were filled with quiet anticipation. Sindbad walked the streets of Baghdad, taking in the sights and sounds of the city he loved, the scent of spices in the market, the laughter of children playing in the narrow alleys, the call of merchants selling their wares. Each moment felt precious, and yet Sindbad's mind was already on the sea, imagining the horizon stretching endlessly before him, filled with the promise of new lands and new adventures. On the morning of his departure, Sindbad stood by the docks, watching as his ship was prepared for the voyage. The air was cool, and the sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft light over the water. The sea, calm and serene, stretched out before him, its surface like glass reflecting the pinks and golds of the morning sky. There was a stillness to the moment, a sense of peace that filled Sindbad with both excitement and trepidation. This was the beginning of something new, something unknown. As he boarded the ship, his crew ready and eager for the journey ahead, Sindbad took one last look at the city. The tall minarets, the bustling streets, the familiar faces. It was all behind him now, fading into the distance as the ship set sail. The wind filled the sails, and soon Baghdad was nothing more than a memory on the horizon. For a time, the sea was calm, and the ship moved smoothly across the water. Sindbad spent his days at the bow, gazing out at the endless expanse of blue, feeling the familiar pull of adventure in his heart. The sea, with all its mysteries, called to him, and for the first time in months, Sindbad felt truly at peace. The quiet rhythm of the waves, the gentle breeze on his face, and the vastness of the sky above all filled him with a sense of freedom that he had longed for since his return to Baghdad. But even as he enjoyed the calm of the voyage, Sindbad knew that the sea could not be trusted to remain so peaceful. It was a place of contradictions, beautiful and deadly, serene and violent. And though the journey had begun without incident, Sindbad's heart was prepared for whatever lay ahead. Through his previous voyages, that the sea was full of surprises, and each day brought with it the possibility of danger. As the days passed and the ship sailed further from familiar waters, Sindbad's thoughts often turned inward. He wondered why he felt this need to seek out adventure when he could have remained in the safety of Baghdad. Was it a simple desire for discovery, or was there something deeper, something that pushed him to test the limits of his courage and endurance? He did not yet have the answers, but he knew that the sea, with all its trials and tribulations, would help him find them. And so, as the ship sailed on, Sindbad prepared himself for the unknown. The sea, once again, had become his world, and though he did not know what dangers awaited him, he was ready to face them, trusting in his experience, his instincts, and the wisdom he had gained from his past adventures. The sea, vast and endless, stretched out before Sindbad as the ship sailed deeper into uncharted waters. The gentle rocking of the ship, the creak of its wooden hull, and the rhythmic splash of the waves against its sides created a serene atmosphere, one that Sindbad had come to cherish on his journeys. The crew, seasoned sailors who had followed him on previous voyages, moved about the ship with a quiet efficiency, their movements in perfect harmony with the gentle motion of the sea. The days passed in peaceful routine. Sindbad often found himself standing at the bow of the ship, watching the horizon, lost in thought. The sea was like a great mirror, reflecting the sky's ever-changing moods. In the mornings, it shimmered with the soft hues of dawn, and by midday, it was a brilliant expanse of blue, endless and calm. The sunsets, with their fiery oranges and purples, turned the water into a canvas of shifting colors, and as night fell, the stars twinkled above, mirrored by the waves below. It was during these quiet moments that Sindbad felt most connected to the world around him. The sea had always been a place of contemplation for him, a space where his thoughts could drift as freely as the ship. There was a strange beauty in the ocean's vastness, in the way it seemed to stretch out forever, unbounded and mysterious. The peace of the voyage filled Sindbad with a sense of contentment, and for a time he allowed himself to believe that this journey might pass without incident. But the sea, as Sindbad knew all too well, could not be trusted to remain peaceful for long. It was both friend and foe, a place of tranquility and terror. He had seen its many faces on his previous voyages, the calm that lulled sailors into a false sense of security, and the sudden storms that could tear a ship apart in moments. The ocean was full of contradictions, and Sindbad had learned to respect its unpredictable nature. As the ship sailed further from the familiar coasts of home, the crew began to notice subtle changes in the weather. The air, once warm and gentle, grew cooler, and the sky, once clear and bright, was now tinged with the faint gray of approaching clouds. The wind, which had carried them smoothly across the water, shifted, growing stronger and more erratic. Sindbad, standing at the helm, watched the horizon with a wary eye. He had seen these signs before, nature's quiet warning of a storm. The crew moved quickly to secure the ship. Sails were furled, ropes tightened, and provisions stored safely below deck. The men, though experienced, could not hide the unease in their eyes as the wind picked up and the first drops of rain began to fall. The sky darkened, and the once calm sea turned restless, its surface churning as the waves grew larger, more powerful. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low, ominous sound that echoed across the water. As the storm descended upon them, the sea transformed from a gentle companion into a violent, untamed force. The waves crashed against the ship, throwing it from side to side, and the wind howled through the rigging like a wild animal. The sky, now black with storm clouds, was lit only by flashes of lightning, each one illuminating the furious sea for a brief moment before plunging it back into darkness. Sindbad gripped the wheel of the ship, his knuckles white with the strain of holding it steady against the storm's relentless fury. The rain lashed his face, and the salt spray stung his eyes, but he remained calm, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had faced storms before, had survived the sea's worst tempests, and he knew that panic would only lead to disaster. The crew, following his example, worked tirelessly to keep the ship afloat, though it was clear that the storm was growing stronger with each passing moment. For hours, they battled the storm, their lives hanging by a thread as the ship was tossed about like a toy in the hands of the sea. The wind screamed, the waves roared, and the ship groaned under the strain, its wooden beams creaking as if ready to splinter apart. Sindbad's thoughts, usually so focused and clear, began to drift as the storm raged on. He found himself contemplating the nature of the sea, how it could be so beautiful and yet so deadly, so inviting and yet so unforgiving. It was a force of nature beyond human control, and in that moment, Sindbad understood more than ever the fragility of life. It was a strange feeling to be so small and insignificant in the face of such power. The storm was not something that could be fought or conquered. It was a reminder that, for all their courage and skill, sailors were at the mercy of forces far greater than themselves. Sindbad had always respected the sea, but now, as the storm threatened to tear the ship apart, he felt a deeper understanding of its dual nature. It was both a source of life and a bringer of destruction, a place of peace and a harbinger of chaos. Just when it seemed the ship could take no more, a massive wave crashed against the hull with a force so great that it tore the ship apart. Sindbad was thrown into the sea, the cold water engulfing him as the world around him dissolved into chaos. He fought to keep his head above the water, clinging to a piece of debris as the waves dragged him away from the wreckage. The storm raged on, but Sindbad's mind was strangely calm. He had been in this situation before, had faced the sea's wrath, and survived. And he knew that the only way to stay alive was to remain calm and focused. Hours passed before the storm finally began to subside. The wind died down, the waves grew smaller, and the rain, once a torrential downpour, became a gentle drizzle. The sea, though still restless, had calmed enough for Sindbad to gather his bearings. He found himself adrift, alone, clinging to a piece of the ship's broken mast. The horizon was empty, the wreckage of the ship scattered across the water like the remains of a shattered dream. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was stark and sobering. Sindbad, exhausted and soaked to the bone, looked out at the calm sea, marveling at how quickly it had returned to its serene state. The sun, which had been hidden behind the storm clouds, was now rising in the east, casting a golden light over the water. The scene was peaceful, almost idyllic, and yet it was in stark contrast to the destruction that had just occurred. As Sindbad floated on the debris, waiting for the strength to return to his limbs, he reflected on the fine line between safety and danger, peace and chaos. The sea, once again, had shown him its dual nature, how it could offer life and take it away in the span of a single storm. And yet, for all its unpredictability, Sindbad felt a strange sense of gratitude. He had survived the storm, and though he was alone, adrift in the middle of the ocean, he was alive. The sea, though cruel, had spared him once more. As the hours passed, Sindbad's thoughts began to turn toward survival. He was adrift, with no land in sight, but he knew that if he remained calm, he could find a way to escape this perilous situation. The sea, for all its danger, had also taught him patience and resilience, and Sindbad was determined to survive, no matter what challenges lay ahead. After days adrift at sea, with the sun beating down relentlessly and no land in sight, Sindbad's hopes began to wane. His body was weak from hunger and thirst, and though the sea had calmed since the storm, it now felt like an endless, indifferent expanse that offered no solace. Yet, in the back of his mind, Sindbad clung to the hope that he might still be saved, that somewhere, beyond the horizon, land awaited him. As the sun began to rise on another day, casting its golden rays across the water, Sindbad noticed a change in the distance. At first, it was nothing more than a dark shape on the horizon, a small smudge against the endless blue. But as the hours passed, it grew larger, taking the form of an island. Sindbad's heart leaped with renewed hope. Summoning the last of his strength, he paddled toward the island, using the debris from the shipwreck as a makeshift raft. The island, as Sindbad approached it, appeared lush and beautiful. Tall trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling in the wind, and the sound of birds filled the air with their melodic calls. A sense of relief washed over Sindbad as he reached the shore, his feet sinking into the soft, warm sand. For the first time since the storm, he felt the solid ground beneath him. and with it came the hope that his ordeal might soon be over. The island was a paradise of sorts, a place where nature flourished in its purest form. Streams of clear, fresh water flowed through the dense forest, and fruit trees lined the edge of the beach, their branches heavy with ripe, sweet offerings. Sindbad drank deeply from a nearby stream, his thirst quenched for the first time in days, and ate the fruit with grateful hands. The island, in all its beauty, seemed to offer him everything he needed to survive, and for a moment, Sindbad allowed himself to believe that he had been saved. Yet, beneath the island's serene surface, there was an unease that Sindbad could not shake. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the quiet beauty of the place began to feel unsettling. The dense foliage, once comforting, now felt claustrophobic, and the stillness of the air seemed too perfect, too controlled. Sindbad's instincts, honed from years of facing danger, warned him that something was not right. His suspicions were confirmed when, after hours of wandering through the forest, he encountered a group of men. At first glance, they seemed like any other island inhabitants, simple villagers going about their daily lives. They smiled at Sindbad and beckoned him to join them. Relieved to have found human company, Sindbad approached them cautiously, hoping that they might offer him help or shelter. The men led Sindbad to a large village hidden deep within the forest. The village, surrounded by thick trees and lush greenery, was unlike any place Sindbad had ever seen. The huts were made of wood and leaves, and the air was thick with the smell of cooking fires. The people welcomed Sindbad with open arms, offering him food and drink, and he felt a momentary sense of ease as he sat among them, grateful for their hospitality. However, as the evening wore on, Sindbad began to notice strange details about the village and its inhabitants. The food, though plentiful, had a peculiar taste, bitter and strange, as if laced with something unnatural. The villagers, who had seemed so friendly at first, watched him with a strange intensity, their eyes following his every move. Sindbad's unease grew, and he soon realized that he had walked into a trap far more dangerous than the storm or the sea. These people, though outwardly kind, were not what they seemed. Sindbad's heart sank as he learned the terrible truth. He had been captured by cannibals. The villagers, who had welcomed him so warmly, had no intention of letting him leave the island. Instead, they planned to fatten him up, and in time, feast on him and the other unfortunate sailors who had been stranded there. Sindbad's fear grew as he observed his fellow captives. Many of them, having eaten the drugged food provided by the cannibals, had fallen into a stupor, their minds dulled and their bodies growing weaker by the day. The villagers fed them regularly, their eyes gleaming with anticipation as they watched their captives grow slower, fatter, and more helpless with each passing day. The days turned into weeks, and Sindbad, though terrified, knew that he had to remain clear-headed if he had any hope of escaping. He refused to eat the food offered to him, knowing that it would sap his will and render him powerless like the others. He maintained his strength by secretly eating only fruits and drinking water from the island's streams, all the while pretending to succumb to the effects of the drug like the rest of the prisoners. He found himself grappling with the nature of fear and survival, questioning the cruelty of the world and the arbitrary forces that had led him to this terrifying place. What kind of world was this, where a man could be welcomed with smiles only to be turned into prey? Sindbad's mind raced with questions about fate, cruelty, and the human capacity for violence, all while he silently plotted his escape. Each night, as the village grew quiet and the fires burned low, Sindbad lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest and the distant murmurs of the cannibals as they discussed their grisly plans. The darkness pressed in around him, thick with fear and uncertainty. But amid that fear, a resolve began to take root within him. He would not allow himself to become a victim of this savage place. He had survived shipwrecks, storms, and the dangers of the sea. He would survive this too. Slowly, carefully, Sindbad began to devise a plan. He knew that strength alone would not save him. He was outnumbered, and the cannibals were stronger and more familiar with the island's terrain. But Sindbad had something else: his wits, his patience, and his ability to adapt. He observed the island carefully, taking note of the terrain, the movement of the villagers, and the natural resources available to him. He realized that the island, with its thick forests and winding rivers, could be both his prison and his escape route. It was a delicate balance. Each day, Sindbad pretended to grow weaker, letting the villagers believe that he, too, had fallen victim to the drug. But at night, he explored the forest in secret, mapping out his route to freedom. The trees, tall and dense, would provide him with cover, and the streams would lead him to the coast, where he hoped to find a way off the island. Time was running out. The villagers' eyes grew hungrier with each passing day, and Sindbad knew that it was only a matter of time before they turned their attention to him. His only chance was to escape under the cover of night, using the island's natural landscape to his advantage. The beauty of the island, which had once seemed so inviting, now held the key to his survival. As the days stretched into weeks, the cannibals grew more comfortable in their control over Sindbad and the other captives. They believed Sindbad had succumbed to the same fate as his companions: dull, weak, and soon to be at their mercy. What they didn't know was that Sindbad had been carefully planning his escape, watching, observing, and learning the patterns of their daily routines. Sindbad's strength, unlike that of his fellow captives, was not in physical power, but in his resilience and cunning. Each night, when the village grew quiet and the fires burned low, Sindbad would rise from his mat and silently slip away from the huts, using the dense shadows of the forest to conceal his movements. He would walk among the trees, studying the island's terrain, noting the paths that led through the thickest parts of the forest and the winding streams that could guide him toward the coast. The forest was both his ally and his refuge, its darkness offering protection and its natural beauty a reminder that even in the face of danger, the world was still filled with wonders. It was during these midnight explorations that Sindbad's connection to the island deepened. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the soft glow of the moon filtering through the trees, and the distant sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled him with a strange sense of peace, even as he prepared to risk everything for his escape. The island, with all its dangers, had a rhythm of its own, one that Sindbad had come to understand. It was this understanding, this quiet respect for the natural world, that would save him. One evening, as Sindbad returned to the village after another night of mapping out his escape route, he realized that the time had come. The cannibals, their hunger growing with each passing day, had begun to prepare for their gruesome feast. The other captives, their minds clouded by the effects of the drug, had lost all hope, their bodies fattened and weak. Sindbad knew that if he didn't act soon, he would share their fate. That night, as the village fell into its usual slumber, Sindbad made his move. Under the cover of darkness, he gathered the supplies he had been secretly collecting, some fruit to sustain him, a sharpened stone he had fashioned into a makeshift weapon, and a long vine he had carefully braided into a rope. He crept silently through the huts, making sure not to disturb anyone, and slipped into the forest, his heart pounding with the knowledge that this was his one chance. The forest was eerily quiet as Sindbad made his way toward the escape route he had chosen. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, and the only sounds were the soft whispers of the wind through the trees. Sindbad moved quickly, but cautiously, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. The cannibals, though they appeared to sleep soundly, were always alert, and Sindbad knew that one wrong step could end in disaster. As he reached the edge of the village, Sindbad paused for a moment to take in his surroundings. The forest, though dense, offered him a clear path toward the coast, and the stream he had followed during his nightly explorations would guide him there. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, and then, without a second thought, plunged into the trees. The forest enveloped Sindbad in its embrace, the tall trees and thick underbrush shielding him from view. He moved swiftly, his feet barely making a sound on the soft forest floor, his eyes focused on the path ahead. The moonlight, though dim, provided enough light for him to navigate the terrain, and the sound of the stream bubbling nearby gave him confidence that he was on the right track. Hours passed as Sindbad made his way through the forest, each step taking him farther from the cannibals and closer to freedom. His body, though weary from weeks of captivity, was fueled by a determination to survive. The fear that had once gripped him now felt distant, replaced by a calm sense of purpose. Sindbad had faced danger before, and he knew that fear was not something to be conquered, but something to be managed. It was this understanding, this ability to stay clear-headed in the face of terror, that had kept him alive through all his voyages. As dawn began to break, casting a pale light over the island, Sindbad finally reached the coast. The sight of the sea, vast and endless, filled him with a sense of relief and triumph. He had made it. The cannibals were far behind him now, their village hidden deep within the forest, and Sindbad stood on the edge of the beach, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of a ship. To his great fortune, just as the sun rose fully into the sky, illuminating the water with golden light, Sindbad spotted a group of merchants anchored near the shore. They had come to the island to gather goods, unaware of the dangers that lurked within. Sindbad, his heart pounding with hope, ran toward them, waving his arms to catch their attention. The merchants, startled at first, quickly realized that Sindbad was in need of help. They welcomed him aboard their ship, offering him food and water, which Sindbad gratefully accepted. As he sat among them, recovering from his ordeal, Sindbad shared the story of his capture and his narrow escape from the cannibals. The merchants, amazed by his tale, listened with wide eyes, marveling at his courage and resourcefulness. For Sindbad, however, the victory was not just in his escape, but in the knowledge he had gained along the way. As the ship sailed away from the island, Sindbad found himself reflecting on the lessons the island had taught him. The cannibals, though terrifying, had shown him the fragility of life and the importance of staying clear-headed in the face of danger. The island itself, with its dense forests and winding streams, had been both a prison and a means of escape, reminding Sindbad of the delicate balance between beauty and peril in the natural world. Sindbad's escape had not been a test of brute strength, but of intelligence, patience, and the ability to understand his surroundings. It was not the strength of his body that had saved him, but the strength of his mind, the ability to remain calm, to observe, and to plan. The cannibals, with all their power and control, had underestimated Sindbad's resilience, and it was that resilience that had allowed him to survive. As the ship sailed farther from the island, Sindbad stood at the bow, watching the land disappear into the distance. The sea stretched out before him, calm and inviting, and the wind filled the sails with a gentle, steady breeze. Sindbad felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for his survival, but for the wisdom he had gained. The island, with all its dangers, had taught him that true strength came not from force, but from understanding. It was a lesson he would carry with him on all his future journeys, a reminder that the world, though filled with peril, was also filled with beauty and opportunity for those who knew how to look. The voyage back to Baghdad was peaceful. The sea, which had once threatened to destroy Sindbad, now seemed calm and steady, as if offering him a moment of respite after his harrowing ordeal. The ship sailed smoothly, carried by gentle winds and clear skies. Sindbad spent much of the journey standing at the bow, his eyes gazing out over the horizon, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. The island of the cannibals, with its lush beauty and hidden dangers, was far behind him now, but the lessons it had taught him remained fresh in his mind. Sindbad, though a seasoned traveler, had once again been reminded of the unpredictability of the world. The island had been a place of contrasts, paradise and prison, beauty and terror. It had tested not only his physical endurance, but also his mental fortitude. And as he sailed back toward his homeland, he found himself contemplating the nature of survival, courage, and the human spirit. Baghdad came into view one bright morning, its golden domes shining in the sunlight, its streets alive with the familiar sounds of bustling markets and the laughter of children. As the ship approached the docks, Sindbad felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was home. The city, with all its noise and activity, seemed to welcome him back with open arms, a stark contrast to the silence and isolation of the island. The merchants he had traveled with helped him gather his belongings, and as Sindbad stepped onto the familiar stone streets, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life he had been given. Word of Sindbad's return spread quickly through the city, and before long, his friends and family gathered to greet him. They marveled at the tale of his escape from the cannibals, their eyes wide with amazement as he recounted his journey. They praised his bravery, his cleverness, and his resilience. But Sindbad, though grateful for their admiration, spoke less of his triumph and more of the lessons he had learned. He told them that the true victory had not been in his escape, but in his ability to remain clear-headed in the face of fear. The cannibals had been stronger, more numerous, and more familiar with the terrain. But Sindbad had survived because he had used his mind. He had observed, he had planned, and he had respected the natural world around him. His escape had been a reminder that even in the most dangerous situations, it was intelligence and patience that mattered most. As the days passed, Sindbad settled back into the rhythm of life in Baghdad. His home, with its comfortable rooms and peaceful gardens, offered him the quiet space he needed to reflect on his journey. The city, though lively and full of distractions, could not erase the memory of the island. There were moments when Sindbad would sit by the window, watching the sun set over the rooftops, and his mind would wander back to the dense forest, the eerie stillness of the village, and the faces of those who had not escaped. It was in these moments of reflection that Sindbad realized how much he had changed. The wealth he had gathered on his journeys, gold, jewels, and treasures from distant lands, no longer held the same allure. What mattered now was the wisdom he had gained, the understanding that life's greatest challenges often came not from the world around us, but from within. The island had tested his willpower, his ability to remain calm in the face of fear, and his belief in his own capacity to survive. Why had he been spared when so many others had perished? What was the purpose of his survival, if not to gain something more profound than wealth or fame? These were the questions that occupied his mind as he walked the quiet streets of Baghdad, watching the ordinary lives of those around him. The city, with all its hustle and bustle, seemed different now. Where once Sindbad had seen only opportunity and adventure, he now saw a deeper beauty in the simplicity of life. The markets, with their vibrant colors and busy merchants, reminded him of the fragile balance between safety and danger. The river that flowed through the heart of the city, its waters calm and steady, brought to mind the wild streams of the island, where life and death had been separated by the thinnest of margins. Sindbad's days were filled with moments of quiet contemplation. He would sit by the river, listening to the gentle flow of the water, and think about all that he had learned. The cannibals, with their brutal ways, had shown him the darkness that could exist in the world. But they had also reminded him of the importance of staying true to oneself. Even in the face of fear, Sindbad had not lost hope. He had relied on his knowledge, his patience, and his respect for the natural world, and in doing so, he had found a way to survive. His return to Baghdad marked not just the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new understanding. Sindbad no longer sought adventure for the thrill of discovery or the accumulation of wealth. What he sought now was wisdom, an understanding of the world, of human nature, and of himself. He knew that his voyages were far from over, but he also knew that each journey would bring with it not just danger, but the opportunity to learn and grow. As the sun set over Baghdad, casting the city in a warm golden light, Sindbad found himself at peace. The sea, with all its unpredictability, would call to him again, as it always did. But for now, he was content to sit by the river, to listen to the sounds of the city, and to reflect on the wisdom he had gained from his latest voyage. He had survived the storm, the cannibals, and the dangers of the island, not because of his strength, but because of his mind. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, a reminder that in the face of fear, it is not brute force that will save you, but the quiet strength of patience, intelligence, and a deep respect for the world around you. And so, as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Sindbad smiled to himself, knowing that he had found something far more valuable than gold or jewels. He had found wisdom, and with it, a sense of peace that no adventure, no matter how dangerous, could ever take away.